I think people see that, they see the Google headlines that real estate's the greatest wealth producer on earth, and this is the reason why.
Yeah.
It's really because leverage amplifies returns.
Right.
Alrighty, welcome back to the Main Street Patriot Podcast. So this is episode number 3, and what we're going to be talking today with my producer Jake
What's up?
is the 4% rule and why it is hard, and how you can beat the 4% rule with a third of the amount of the capital in a third of the amount of the time. So, Jake, do you think everybody's asking himself, what is this 4% rule you're speaking of, Jimmy?
I think so.
All right.
Yes.
So I'm going to get it. I'm going to cut to the chase and get into it. And so here's the 4% rule. Most financial planning, traditional financial planning is based off the 4% rule. And it's like, hey, how much money do you want in retirement? Well, you need to build up a portfolio worth 25 times that amount of that, 25 times that annual amount. And then hopefully in retirement, you live like 25 years. So you would essentially draw down 4% of that cash every year, and then that's what you would live off for 25 years.
Right.
So just on the surface, there's a problem there. Is with life expectancy now, people probably live a lot longer than 25 years. When I first heard of this, and I'm 45, so when I probably heard about this was like 15 years ago, I'm like, wait a minute, with the advances in modern technology,
people are going to live longer.
people are going to live longer. I don't know if saving for 25 years is going to get it done. So that's problem one with traditional financial planning and the 4% rule. But we'll move on from that. So here's the numbers and sense of that. I've done a lot of these type of calls with investors. I'm like, hey, how much money do you want in retirement? And what I've seen that if you don't live on the West Coast or the East Coast, people want to make around 10 grand a month in retirement.
Okay.
And so
Pretty common.
yeah, pretty common. You know, other people I talk to, it's like 20 and 30, but the important thing is to understand the concept and the concept of the number. So whenever I show this to people, I start with $10,000 a month in retirement. The first problem is if you say you want $10,000 in retirement, another problem with traditional financial planning is that traditional financial planning is tax deferred, not tax free. So when people hit their 401k match, or they want to save money in taxes this year, they're not really saving money in taxes. There's a great book called 401 Chaos by Andy Tanner. But when I knew I needed to get into real estate and that a 401k could not be my main retirement or wealth builder, it was after reading this book. And so this might be slow down the podcast, but traditional financial planning, when you think you're deferring your taxes, and fundamentally, this is a principle I have, is you never tax. You always want to pay taxes on the seed. You never want to pay taxes on the harvest. So what a 401k does is you don't pay taxes on your seed if you're a farmer. But after saving and investing for 30 years, you pay taxes on that amount. It's like, and you pay ordinary income tax. And so no one in their right mind, as an investor, I never pay ordinary income tax. Now, I pay ordinary income tax, and I lower it a lot because I'm a real estate investor, but I pay ordinary income tax on my active income.
Sure.
My long-term investments, I pay long-term capital gains. When I own a house for a day in a year, I pay long-term capital gains. But no investor in their right mind would ever pay ordinary income tax on their investments. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It's like Warren Buffett would never pay ordinary income tax on his investments.
Right. So to look at a 401k and kind of the same principle.
So I was just like, I would never do it.
Yeah.
I would much rather my seed be taxed than my harvest. And now there's different exceptions with Roth IRAs and all that other stuff, and it's outside the scope of this podcast.
Sure.
But bottom line, and I've ran these numbers several times, bottom line is if you want 10K a month and you have a 35% tax bracket, you want 10K a month in retirement, what that really means is you want 15K a month. And so, okay, the target just got a little harder. Now you multiply 15K times 12, that's 184K a year. So when you are asked, what do you want in retirement? You say 10K. What you really mean is I need 184K a year to draw down off of. So to the 4% rule, you got to multiply 184 times 25, and that number is 4.6 million. So you need to get a stock investment portfolio of 4.6 million. And so that's your target. And so it's a big lift. And so at a 5% average earnings rate, which is generally what someone's retirement portfolio is going to do, that's going to require you to save 60 grand a year for 30 years. Like, a lot of people, are they capable?
Your average American is not putting away $60,000 a year.
Yeah, there's a reason there's a retirement crisis in this country, and it's because of that. It's because to retire is a big lift. It's 60 grand for 30 years. And the bottom line is you're just not getting a high enough return. Yeah. And even if it was a 10% return, the numbers are not that much different. Like, it's a big lift to get a portfolio up to $4.6 million. And so it's very hard. And so
are most people aware of this, do you think?
No.
Yeah.
Well, I don't think I think they just think that's how it is. Mm-hmm. And so they don't know this alternative strategy.
Sure.
And so here's my basic belief is that it's really hard to become wealthy with your own money and paying taxes.
Sure.
Like, your greatest wealth destroyer is taxes.
Sure.
And so does that mean we should have a revolution and not pay taxes and then taxation's evil? We can have a debate on that on another podcast. But it is what it is.
It is what it is right now. Yeah.
Yeah. And then I had a mentor of mine, like, do you know the best way to never pay taxes again?
What's that?
Stop making money. Stop working. And so that was last podcast.
That was last episode.
Talked about how that's somewhat intrinsically evil.
Right.
Okay, so it's like we got to work, we got to pay taxes, but is it a responsibility of somebody who wants to be wealthy to pay the least amount of tax legally possible? I think it is. There was a Judge Hand in the Supreme Court said it is a citizen's obligation to pay the least amount of tax in a legal manner.
They said that. Wow, Judge?
Yeah.
That's awesome.
I can look it up. But there's nothing wrong with having a tax strategy to minimize your tax liability.
Sure.
It's a component of becoming wealthy.
Right.
And so
I always think that from a high-level perspective, the way that certain taxes should be structured are to incentivize productive behaviors in society. Like, if you look at the government from an economic point of view, they need the economy to be productive. They need people to take certain actions, and so it makes sense. Yeah. So they influence in a positive way. So they provide incentives to do important and beneficial things for the economy.
Absolutely. That's part of Congress's job.
Yeah.
And so we are going to do an episode, but the tax code is actually a treasure chest if you're willing to open up that treasure chest and do the work. Mm-hmm. But you're exactly right that Congress and the government influences behavior. And what's a big thing the national government's concerned with? Maybe safe, clean housing for its citizens?
I would hope so.
So are they going to incentivize the entrepreneurs and the investors who provide that?
They should.
Yes.
And they do.
Yeah,
right?
and they do. And so it's another, like, the government, here's another, but bottom line is this country is a country founded by real estate investors for real estate investors.
Do you know that George Washington was like a huge real estate investor? He was like unstoppable in trying to like acquire land.
Yes.
It's so funny to like, I didn't know that until I read the Chair Now biography of Washington.
Yeah.
It's like, this guy knew the value of real estate.
All the founding fathers, and when we get into the inflation episode, we'll talk about it. But bottom line is this country is a country founded by real estate investors for real estate investors. But so the tax code structure to benefit real estate investors. But the other thing is, the other reason I don't think traditional financial planning works is because it's all your own money. And I don't know one wealthy person who doesn't know how to leverage other people's money.
Sure.
Like Elon. Do you think he pays for SpaceX with his own cash?
Nope.
Guarantee you and I need to probably look in this, but they're taking on investors who they either give equity to, and I'm sure they have a significant debt position. And so Most corporations have a significant debt positions. You have to learn to responsibly use debt, use other people's money to grow wealthy. And so that's another thing. What I enjoy helping people do is like, I'm like their debt tricycles.
Okay.
Our debt training wheels.
Yeah.
To show them get the safest, best debt out there, but learn to use it responsibly.
Okay.
And so once again, another episode.
Nice.
So I'm a simple man. If I needed, and I'm a kind of a meathead real estate investor. So if I knew my target was I need a portfolio worth 4.6 million, or let me step back for a second. If I wanted $10,000 a month in income, do you know what I would do? Well, I know like my average rent's $1,100, so I'd step that back to $1,000, and I would just buy 10 houses and pay them off. Boom.
Boom.
$10,000 a month, too easy. So that's
Make
one
it simple.
way. But there's a faster way. That's with using no leverage.
Okay.
But there's a faster way to do it, and it's maximize the 4-pillar strategy. And so a key component to the 4-pillar strategy is the fact that the government will give you, if you're married and have 2 W-2s, is 20, 30-year fixed loans.
Give those.
What's that?
How do they give that to you?
So it's called conventional mortgages, and you're eligible for 20 of those.
Okay, you're allowed to do those. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so, like, the 30-year fixed mortgage is a glorious debt instrument.
Yeah.
But you can get 20. Subject of another podcast of why it's so good, but you can get 20. So
Great.
if your target's 4.6 and you can get 20 of these great loans, that means you just need 20 houses worth $230K and you have a $4.6 million portfolio. And now, that 4.6 number is for people to create over 30 years. I did a thought experiment because most people I talk to, they want 10 grand a month and they'd like to stop working, even though we just talked about how that's bad in the last episode. They'd like to be, and it's also part of the passive income paradox is, let's say you have 5 grand coming in passively. That's not enough for most people to quit their job.
Sure.
But it is enough to take a couple months off. It is enough to have some leverage with your boss. It is enough not to be scared. And we're going to talk about that in the passive income paradox episode. But so bottom line is 10 years. They want 10 grand in 10 years. So I'm like, okay, how do I crack this nut? And it's like, well, to have a $4.6 million portfolio, you need 20 houses worth $230K. But that's in 10 years. And so I did some more math. And it's like, well, what does the house need to be worth today? You know, saying we get 5% appreciation, which that's the average over 70 years for real estate in the United States.
Sure.
So the house needs to be worth 140 this year. And now
Today in 2025.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Right.
And then in 2035, it'll be worth 230K, and then boom, you've hit your target.
You hit your target.
Now, if you want 20 houses worth 230K this year, that's kind of a tough lift. You're going to need 900 grand in down payments. So kind of a tough lift. Traditional financial planning, well, what was our number we said? Traditional financial planning, you need to save, what is 60 grand times 30? So you got to save around 1.8 of your own money, 1.8 of your own money to get to
In 10 years.
in 30 years.
In 30 years.
Yeah, but you got to save 1.0 of your own money to get to 4.6. So even if you're going to buy 20 $230,000 houses this year, you're going to need 900K in you're going to need 900K in down payments. So for 20 houses, you ready to go? Yep. So yeah, if you wanted to do 20 houses today, your down payment would be $900,000. So 230,000 houses, 20% down payment, your down payment's 900K. Still not really achievable, right?
Sure. Yeah. Compare that to.
But still half of what you got to do in traditional financial planning.
Right,
And like I said, I think traditional financial planning, it has its merits, but its 2 biggest weaknesses is you got to use all your own money and you have tax deferred, not tax advantage. There's a big difference.
Yeah.
And so, okay, cool. So what happens instead of 30 years, and I couldn't do it today, what if I said, oh, what would have to happen if I did it in 10 years? Well, that would mean you'd have to buy $140,000 houses, $140,000 houses today. And so the total down payments for that would be $600K. So
That's a lot better.
you're down to a third of where you were for traditional financial planning, right? Now, I have had some people do it in a year. They had $600K to deploy, and we just muscled through and knocked it out. Most people, That's not what they're going to do. What I recommend is 2 houses a year for 10 years. Like the bare minimum's 2 houses a year for 10 years. Sure. A lot of people move faster than that. And now we also do creative deals where you leave 10% down in the deal instead of 20. So now your down payment to get to that 4.6 million we've been talking about is down to $300K.
Wow.
That becomes very, very doable for people. And that's what we show people how to do.
And that's in 10 years.
Yeah. Well,
That's
no.
a lot.
No, I've had people buy
Sure.
20 houses within 2 to 3 years.
Sure. But you could do it in 10 years, and you're still doing it faster than
Yeah,
the
2
traditional
houses.
plans.
So like the easy put it on autopilot is buy 2 houses a year for 10 years.
Yeah.
It's like but most people who are in the investor program, they want to move faster than that.
Sure.
And so here's the bottom line. Let's say you did it in the, you bought all 20 houses in year 1. So you get to your 4.6 portfolio value. You'd have 1.8 in appreciation. You'd have the tenants paying down your equity, $340K. You'd save $300K in taxes. And then your year 10 cash flow is going to be $170K for year 10. And you'd also have 1.6 million in potential equity to pool. And so what I call as the 4 pillars of investing is appreciation, cash flow, the ability to use leverage, and tax advantages. So your 4-pillar return is close to $2.6 million. So imagine that you spend $600K and your return is 2.6. So let's see what the return on that is. And then what you got to understand with real estate is leverage amplifies returns. Mm-hmm. You're going to put 20% down on a 30-year mortgage, and that's why your rate of return is so high.
Just leverage amplifies return. Can you break that down for everybody?
Yeah. So here's how the simplest way I break this down for people. Okay. Let me run those numbers real quick. So you put $600K down and you make 2.6. So that's a 430% return in 10 years of your IRR. That's why real estate creates so much wealth for people. Yeah. Because you can expect around a 400% return on the cash you put down.
Wow. But because of all 4 pillars, basically.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, that's where amazing. People get messed up in real estate is that they're only looking for, what's my return on cash flow? Mm-hmm. Like they're willing to cut off their nose to spite their face. Like, who cares what your year 1 cash flow is? As long as after 10 years, you're getting a 400% return. Honestly, I run these numbers. Most of your return is going to be in appreciation. Mm-hmm. Then your next question is, is it safe?
It's a long-term asset, right?
Yeah. Is it safe to assume real estate's going to appreciate? Well,
right.
I call it, I think we're going to put this on YouTube, right?
Yep.
So this is one of my favorite slides called Never Bet Against the Champ slide.
All right.
This is the price change for the median home price in the United States since the Battle of Midway, since 1942. And you could see that real estate has only gone down 6 years out of the last 70.
Wow.
And now, granted, it went down, it crashed in 2007, but I don't think the real estate crash was a real estate crash. I think it was a fraud crash. Mm-hmm. It was a lending crash because people are allowing fraudulent loans.
Right.
And so is it a safe assumption to say real estate will appreciate 5% a year? Yeah, here's 70 years worth of data to say that that's reasonable. And even if it only appreciates 2.5%, it's still ridiculous numbers. Now, let's go back to leverage amplifies returns. So here's what I mean. Let's say we have the same $100,000 house. Mm-hmm. And one you're going to buy with cash because you're afraid of debt. Okay. And another you're going to buy with leverage. The cash needed to purchase a $100,000 house is $100,000. Really, it's probably around $130,000 because these are after-tax dollars. That's, you know how I said earlier, like it's really hard to get wealthy if you're not using other people's money? Mm-hmm. This is what I mean. Yeah. Because you combine it with your tax burden, like you're behind the 8 ball. Mm-hmm. Now, if you do it with leverage with a 30-year fixed loan, you only need to put 20% down.
And that's with providing a return even for your investors. That's all calculated in there.
Well, no, this is using a 30-year fixed loan from a bank.
Okay.
So this is,
So you're providing return to the bank.
Yeah.
And all that is wrapped into it.
Correct.
And so using the other money skyrockets your return on investment.
And then this is just a simple math, how I show this concept. So let's say year one, that house appreciates 5%. The guy who paid cash for that house has a 5% return. The guy who used leverage has a 25% return because they have $20,000 in the investment and they gained $5,000. So now they have a 25% return, right?
Yep.
Now where it gets fun and really interesting is let's take this same investor, took $100,000, and instead of getting one house, now he has 5. He still has a 25% return, but he made 25 grand because he's got 5 houses instead of one. Mm-hmm. And that's the other thing with our investor group. It's, hey, unless you're going to get 5 of these assets, it's not worth doing. Because when you have 5 houses, you have one tenant move out, it's not that big a deal.
Sure.
But if you have one house and one tenant missing, that's rough.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Threw off everything.
And so does that, you think does that make sense why leverage amplifies returns?
It makes total sense. The numbers show it.
And so, this is another objection I get. Like, Jimmy, real estate only goes up 5%. The SPX, you can pretty much, since 1957, will say it'll go up 10%. And I'm like, I agree. Like, I agree with you. The SPX the stock market goes up 10% a year, and real estate only goes up 5%. So then why do we have all these gurus and all these courses and all these people trying to get into real estate? It's because you can use leverage. You can't, that's also something I learned from 401 Chaos, is you can't use leverage to invest in the stock market.
Sure.
People did that in the 1920s, and we had the Great Depression because of it.
Gotcha.
And then, another objection people give is like, the stock market's safe, real estate not. And then if that's true, how come I can take my stock portfolio, go to the banker, can you give me a loan off this, Mr. Banker? And now I get it that there's margin loans, or I forget what they're called. I get that you can get a line of credit off your stock portfolio, but a bank will not lend you off your 401k. They'll lend you off your liquid stocks.
Sure.
But if a 401k is so safe, why will a bank not lend on it? Now, if I have a piece of property, banks lend on that all day long, right?
Yeah. No, exactly. So, Jimmy, let's say somebody is like, okay, I'm convinced like the 4% rule through traditional retirement accounts, it's impossible for me. Real estate makes sense for me, but I don't have $600,000 to deploy. How do they go from there?
Well, do you have 2 a year? So 2 a year would be, and so 140,000, let's do those numbers real quick. $140,000 house times 20, that's $28,000 times 2. I'd say, hey, do you have $56K a year to invest? And then
that's a lot easier.
Yeah. So I would say do 2 of those a year for 10 years.
Okay.
If you're not sure you can get $56K a year, then we would look into alternative strategies like the Burr strategy.
Okay.
Where you really don't have any down payment, or it's a 10% down payment. At that point, you're investing $30,000 a year.
And then you can cycle it.
Yeah. And then think about it. Go back to that episode before. If you have a cash machine and you're making over $200K a year, most of those people can afford a $60,000 a year investment.
Sure.
If you can't, you need to flip and wholesale. You should not be buying long-term assets at that point. You shouldn't probably be building up a rental portfolio.
Right. Nice.
And so that's what I mean when I say the 4% rule is hard. Like, there's a reason it takes 30 years. If you're not using tax advantages and leverage other people's money, it's going to be a grind.
Yeah. But it seems like, based on what you just broke down, your strategy here, I mean, you are blowing the 4% rule out of the water.
We're crushing it with a third of the capital and a third amount of the time.
That's amazing.
And so I think people see that, they see the Google headlines or the Instagram headlines that real estate's the greatest wealth producer on earth, and this is the reason why. Yeah. It's really because leverage amplifies returns.
Right. But you have to do it right. You have, like, to your point.
Yeah, it's not like you borrow money and then you become wealthy.
Right.
You have to responsibly use debt in the right assets.
Right. And manage it correctly.
Yeah.
Find the right properties.
And then once again, people in our program don't have the time to do that. So that's why they trust our team to find it, fix it, find the tenant, and then manage it for the long term, because you don't get wealthy doing real estate with just one house.
Right.
You got to get to the point where you rinse and repeat.
Yeah.
Like the people who have done best in our program and become the wealthiest are the people who are able to buy the houses fastest, easiest, and not necessarily cheapest. I recommend they buy, the better quality assets.
Yeah.
But the people who've been able to rinse and repeat have had the greatest success.
Sure. Scalability.
Yeah.
Nice. Do any of the investors ever uncomfortable with the taking on of debt and like the kind of leveraging that you're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the main things people have to get over, and we'll do an episode on leverage. Essentially, debt is money. Since we have a fiat currency, like we'll do an inflation episode where we talk about the destruction of the American dollar.
Okay.
But I don't think you can become wealthy without learning to responsibly manage debt. And I don't mean credit card debt. Mm-hmm. And so like the Dave Ramsey's of the world, and we'll get into it in that episode, but so Dave Ramsey's like no debt, never.
Debt free. Right.
And so I agree with him with consumption. I would never use a credit card for consumption. And when I was younger, we talked about episode 1, I went to Iraq and a lot of credit card debt. Yeah. And I was using leverage to consume. Mm-hmm. It's different when you're using leverage to produce.
Right.
And so it's, there's a difference between Newtonian physics and quantum physics.
Yep.
And the rules aren't the same.
Right.
It's the same thing with investing. Like once you've got your cash machine and you've crested and you're ready to become an investor, you have new rules. Now, does that mean take outrageous debt? Or does that mean take debt out to speculate? No. But a 30-year fixed mortgage is like training wheels for debt. That's why we work with people with cash machines, because what's the worst case scenario with a rental property?
Bankruptcy.
Okay, let's talk about that. How would a rental property get you to the point of bankruptcy?
Your cash flow is in such a state, you can't make the mortgage payments. That could be tenant issues, unforeseen construction issues. Yep. Whatever.
So not construction issue, but maintenance issues.
Sure. Yeah.
And then you could have a tenant move out, right?
Right.
But we only work with people with cash machines who have a liquid reserve to withstand the monthly ups and downs.
Yep.
Because the thing about owning a rental property, that's another thing I don't like about passive income equals expenses. It's not the constant same amount of cash every month. There's maintenance. Mm-hmm. And the other thing about cash flow that we should have talked about, in this 10-year gap, just like your house, the value of the house goes up 4 to 5% a year, the rents go up 5% a year. And this is the other magic of the 30-year mortgage. What happens to your mortgage payment?
Stays the same.
For 30 years. So your rent's going up. Some of your expenses, like your utilities, will go up with inflation as well.
Sure.
But your principal and interest stays the same. And that's at that 10-year mark. That's where the cash flow gap opens up. Like houses I've owned for 10 years where I still have a ridiculously solid mortgage payment from 2015.
Sure.
It's like those things are cash cows, but you got to wait.
Yeah, or to the moment where you can refi.
And so in our program, we're not going to work with anybody who doesn't have the cash reserves to withstand any bad thing that happens in the first 10 years.
Sure.
And so the other thing is when I say tell someone to buy a rental property, I tell them to put their down payment and then pretty much put $5,000 in savings aside for any bad thing that could happen with the property. Mm-hmm. So as far as driving a rental property, driving you to bankruptcy, if you have a cash machine and you're in the right position to start investing, bankruptcy is not, anything's possible, but it's not likely.
Yeah, right. Statistically improbable.
Because that's why owning these long-term assets are not for everybody.
Yep.
There are people who have cash to deploy who need to augment and put a higher lever on their cash.
Yeah. Fantastic.
So another reason, so we'll get into this in the debt episode, but where mortgages hurt people is where there's a balloon. So what happened in the crash in 2008 is people put long-term assets on short-term debts. So they got loans that had no interest or zero interest until the teaser rate was open, what's called a balloon.
Yep.
So they'd own the house for 2 or 3 years, and then the balloon would come up, and they'd have a new loan come in with an interest rate they couldn't afford. Mm-hmm. That's why people got hammered by mortgages. But when you have a fixed rate of interest and it's a known cost for 30 years, your interest can only go down.
Right.
Because you'll get a 30-year mortgage, And then when interest rates drop, you refi.
Right.
That's the interesting thing about interest rates is people don't get wealthy buying in low interest rate environments. Do you want to know why? Because prices are skyrocketing.
Sure.
Interest rates go down. Generally, prices
are up.
Stay the same or go up. And so people who get wealthy are when something bad happens to the economy, the Fed lowers interest rates and they already have assets and they refi everything.
Yep.
That's when people get wealthy in low interest rate environments or people who already have assets.
Sure.
And so that's why it'll be its own episode. But the reason we can destroy the 4% rule is because we're using a 30-year fixed mortgage, and we can use leverage to amplify our returns.
Nice.
What other questions do you think the audience needs to know? What do you think people are asking themselves right now? Because I did go through the numbers kind of fast. I think for this episode in the show notes, we'll also put the video from the course.
Yeah.
Going through the 4% rule, because even me, these numbers kind of get out of control for me as well.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think my big takeaway, and I'm sure the same would be for listeners of the show, is like traditional retirement plan success for most Americans is unreachable. And here's a tool that actually gets you there faster for a third of the capital.
I get annoyed with the gurus like the stock market's a casino and everybody should have their money out of the stock market. I don't agree with that. I don't invest in the stock market just because I get a higher return in my businesses. I don't like the conspiracy theory investor, right? Like the system's rigged against me and all that stuff.
Right. But there is a problem out there. You talk about the retirement crisis.
Yeah.
To some extent.
Yeah. And you could classify it as it's not a systemic problem, but it's people aren't saving and investing enough or pursuing excellence enough.
Sure. Yeah.
But like to blame it on the system, I don't.
Right. Yeah, no, makes sense.
I mean, dude, the stock market returns 10% a year. We're in the greatest economy,
right?
Most abundant society ever, and the stock market brings liquidity to that economy. I love the stock market.
Sure.
I just don't want to have to plug away. I don't want to have to spend 30 years to get a $4.6 million portfolio. There's so many easier ways to do it.
Right. So it's your personality, the brute force.
And then that's if I was still a corporate employee, I would do my match, and then I would invest in real estate.
Nice.
And so it's not like get completely out of the stock market.
Yeah.
And especially, if it suits your personality, that's great. But I don't think it needs to be so black and white. Like I'm either all in the stock market or all out of the stock market. That's when someone's trying to sell something to you, when they're trying to demonize their competition. Like I think it's great. And we're going to do an episode about when you do syndications, when you do stock market versus single family. But just like my own path, you got to put all your cash in the assets that have the 4 pillars.
Yeah.
The stock market, we'll do it in the wealth pyramid, but the stock market doesn't have all four pillars. Essentially, what's wrong with traditional financial planning is the wealth pyramid's inverted. I wish I had a visual of it, but essentially you do everything that has the 4 pillars, and as you get wealthier, then you can do like private lending. Lending to other people doesn't have tax advantages and it doesn't have leverage. So now you're down to 2 pillars, right? So the wealthier you get, the less pillars you need to grow your wealth. And so the highest appreciation, that's what you get in the stock market. You do that at the top of the pillar when you're super, super liquid.
Yeah.
And so but that's subject for another episode.
Sounds good. Well, the next one is going to be on the passive income paradox, right?
Yep.
Awesome. So you can put the link to this in the show notes, right? If somebody wanted to do a deeper dive on these topics, where can they do that?
My YouTube station, we have several videos going through the math on this one. We'll post it in the show notes.
Nice.
Speaking of that, if you're listening to this podcast and you like it, please like, share, and subscribe. Give us comments. And if you're liking my podcast, also like my Instagram page and my Facebook page and my YouTube page. We're always putting great content out there. If you want more information, we also have a free Facebook page called Ranger Real Estate, How to Get Wealthy on Main Street. We could also post the 4% video there. And then let me know how I did trying to do advanced math verbally and put that in the comments. But that's what we got for you guys this episode. The next episode is going to be about the passive income paradox, one of my favorite subjects to talk about. Thank you guys for joining us on this episode.
Thanks, Jimmy. See you guys next time.
So if you like what you heard today and you want to learn more, sign up for a discovery call with one of the Vreeland Capital success coaches at jimmybreeland.com.